Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start. Please be seated. Thank you. We will now begin with our second panel session. I would like to invite on stage Madam Darden Shaling, Information Secretary for Department of Information and International Relations, to moderate the second session on the topic Situation of Tibetans, Mongols, Uyghurs, and the Case of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tibetv. I'd like to invite the very impressive panel of 6 speakers up on stage, please. All of you, without having to call by name, please find your nameplate and be seated. We will now move on to session 2, the topic of which is the situation in Tibet, East Turkestan, inner southern Mongolia, and the case of Hong Kong. As you can see, we have speakers specializing in all these areas who have been relentlessly advocating for the rights of people in all the regions under the repressive Chinese regime. So while rights violations in China or across China is pervasive, what is alarming in today's day and time is definitely the mass internment of Uyghurs, cultural assimilation of Mongolians, and the cultural annihilation that's taking place in Tibet, where it is illegal to be Tibet, and you could be punished or penalized for just asserting your identity. So friends, without further ado, I will proceed with the panel session, and I would now first like to invite Dr. Xiao Jiang to speak about the overall developments in PRC under the CCP rule and how and why China manages to muscle up on that global human rights stage. Dr. Xiao is a survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre and is an independent scholar and an activist based in the UK. So over to you, Dr. Xiao.
Thank you. I'm honored to share my research on features of China's political system inside People's Republic of China and its influence. For some scholars, Chinese government is authoritarian or totalitarian regime. China political system is autocracy, dictatorship, or party state. This definition partly interprets the features of the China political system. I think that party empire is a more suitable name specified in the PR China Constitution, giving Chinese Communist Party paramount source of power. The party empire attempts to rule out any dissident, using end-to-end grid of social control and expand overseas with the Chinese developed model, state sovereignty and security privilege over individual rights and basic freedom. The CCP is carrying out national security and stability maintenance system to repress any human rights and pro-democracy activity. By using term China's nation, party empire of Chinese imperialism has invaded and assimilated in and South Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, and East Turkestan. Hong Kong has been forcibly into the party emperor. Chinese Communist Party has currently ruled Hong Kong like occupation of the Tibet in mid-1950s. At the same time, referring to the repressive methods of the British colony. Moreover, the party emperor has consistently refused people in Hong Kong true universal suffrage. The Chinese Constitution contains inconsistency and contradiction, such as CCP, paramount source of the power and the people's sovereignty, the democratic dictatorship. To solve this problem, CCP has used the strategy creating up one, sealing the Vatican. For example, respect and protection of the human right has been put into the Chinese Constitution, right in the right to free speech, free press, freedom of assembling and association, freedom of the religion belief. But in reality, all human rights have been restricted and suppressed. Law as a tool of the people emperor. Chinese assembling law has been used as the legal means of repression. The cyber security law to silence online criticism. Regional ethnic autonomy law has moved towards forced assimilation into Han Chinese domination under the party emperor. All the sensitive legal cases are not independent by code, but under the authority and directly supervision under CCP. According to PRC legal codes, peaceful protest and criticize government, calling for party government transparency are charged creating a disturbance. For example, after splash ink on Xi Jinping post, Dong Xiaoqun was the first detained and then has been enforced treatment at the mental health hospital. Ilham Tohti, a Uyghur scholar critical of the government policy towards Muslim minority, has been charged with separatism and sentenced to life in prison. Religion groups outside of the Chinese Communist Party control are charged with illegal assembling or even more serious charge of terrorism. Tibetan language activity, Darcy Wang Chek has been jailed for 5 years. Shen Mengyu and other dozen labor rights activities have been forcibly disappeared after they attempt to organize an independent labor trade union. Veteran human rights defender and democracy activities such as Qin Yumin and Hu Shigen establish opposition parties and initiate the Human Rights Forum have been charged subversion of state power, have spent over 20 years in prison. Human rights lawyer Wang Quanzhang has been held in Tianjin Detention Center for over 3 years without trial. Hong Kong is no exception. Over 200 peaceful protests have false criminal charge. The longest is the 7-year prison sentence. After Tiananmen, Chinese Communist Party emperor has gradually studied its own version on human rights foreign policy in order to counter-argue international criticism. As one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and one of big 3 on global powers, China plays more influential role on Human Rights Council. China lead one resolution at UN this year. 1-1 means that China will win twice. It seemed that all regimes supporting China resolution enjoy the collusion, but the people in the countries are paying with significant cost. People UNPA is making universal human rights only as the life to survive, freedom to food, development and trade privilege over human rights. Chinese government also appointment government official label them as independent expert into the UN Human Rights Council advisory community and the UN treaty bodies. Chinese government has also labeled the Chinese Congo in consultative stage with the Economic and Social Council to occupy space of the UN human rights mechanism and water down sensitive issues. Meantime, Chinese authorities has prevented NGO criticize Chinese government human rights from their review and application of NGO consultative stage. China, the world's second largest economic, only donate $100,000 for official of the High Commissioner for Human Rights last year, 6,000 equivalent to contribution of Sweden. However, China has mainly played influence on UN human rights mechanism and meddled in political and economic affairs of the other countries through China's global investor strategy, especially after global financial crisis. Open Confucius Institute exchange program of Chinese government officials, media corporation, China's Business Association, democratic country have backed down over China's censorship, compromise principle of free expression, and decreased government transparency. For example, before Chinese leaders visited other countries, the pressure from Chinese government is passed down the authority chain in host country. Police officials in host country were briefed to avoid to lose the Chinese lose the face and bad public perception for the Chinese party UNPA. There was pressure from the Chinese government on way of the policy operation as well as on imposing restriction on where people could protest and how they could protest during Chinese state visit. Some activities have been detained and until the Chinese leader leave the host country. Any relevant communication between Chinese state visit and authorities in host countries have been scarred by the host governments in name of public interest and national security. For the first and second China's UPR, Chinese government claim right to life is an overreaching human rights principle, but even only in this regard, Chinese government failed to meet its commitment. Chao Shunli, a law graduate, used her own legal background to help others in their fight for justice, participation in China's first and second UPR. For the first China UPR, Chao Shunli was sent to re-education through labor for 2.5 years. The second China's UPR, Chao Shunli was murdered by the Chinese government. Tenzin Derek Rinpoche and other 3 prisoners of the conscience were tortured to death in jail next year after the second China's UPR. In 2017, Xi Jinping was invited at a speech at the UN office at Geneva. Police arrested 5 Tibetan protesters inside the UN square just a couple hours before Xi Jinping entered the UN building. The UN Human Rights Council did not officially protest about the police action to the UN President and the General Secretary. In fact, the UN took sides with China, sovereignty, privilege over individual rights, and security over right to peaceful protest. 6 months later, Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, died in state custody since Nazi Germany. Moreover, over 1 million Uyghurs have been held in concentration camps. Since Chinese leaders have violated rights with complete impunity in CCP's 69 years rule in PRC. Human rights mechanisms have suffered from a lack of independence and effectiveness for many years, especially hopeless against the global superpowers' violation of human rights. The Chinese Communist Party emperor is attempting to replace the standard of concept of International Bill of the Human Rights by their own version. Such challenge require a fundamental reform. So I just gave some suggestion. The venue of the fourth circle of the UPR should be take place in the reviewed countries rather than in Geneva. China's next review, should take place in Lhasa, Hunan, Beijing, Urumqi, and Hong Kong. The venue should be in the sense of massacres and crackdown in 1959, 1967, 1989, 2009, and 2015, all inside concentration camps. If Chinese government refuse, China next UPR should be take place in Taipei. If Chinese government still refuse, PR China cannot become a member of the UN Human Rights Council in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xiao. Though rights abuses or violation is rampant and relentless, I think what is again surprising is since Xi Jinping's ascension to power in 2013, China, I think, managed to move beyond defense and is now holding a more confident posture in the corridors of power, especially in the United Nations. And then your suggestion to have the next review, which will be in 2022, elsewhere, I think that's a fantastic idea, something that advocacy groups can definitely pursue in their lobby agenda, right? Yeah. Okay, so moving on, we will now talk about Tibet, but more specifically about the environmental rights of the Tibetan people. The reason why we thought this was important is we are catering to a global audience, and it's not just about Tibet's environment. It is, I mean, all of us know, it's the roof of the world, the third pole, Asia's water tower, Asia's rainmaker, and the amplifier and the driver of global warming. So I have here with us on the panel, Tempa Gyaltsen, one of the most outspoken, sorry, this was for Xiao, so you finished right ahead of time. Thank you for that. So yeah, Tempa Gyaltsen is a research fellow at the Tibet Policy Institute of the Central Tibetan Administration based in Dharamsala, and is today one of the most important spokesperson for the environmental situation and rights of Tibetan people inside Tibet. So Tempala will start with his presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Very good afternoon to you all. As a kid growing up back in Tibet some 20 years ago, I remember going to school every morning with my friends. And as we go to school, we had to cross two small rivers. And when we feel like drinking some water, we just lie down on the ground in line and start sipping from the same river with no fear of water being contaminated by mining waste or urban waste or city sewage. But unfortunately, what I used to do some 20 years ago may no longer be safe for children in Tibet to do. So what I'm going to talk about is violation of social and environmental rights of the Tibetan people and how the rights for a safe, clean, healthy, and sustained environment is not granted as proclaimed in the framework principle on human rights and the environment. Now I'm going to present here 4 actual case examples that happened in Tibet. And each case example highlights a different means of violating the rights of the people and environment. It was on 16th August 2013. Around 4,500 Tibetans came out on the street and protested against Chinese mining. They protested against mining on the sacred mountain. And also they were protesting against mining inside a nature reserve. And this event happened in a place called Tibettv in East Tibet. Now what happened here was the nature reserve was one of the most important nature reserves under the PRC. And it was proclaimed nature reserve in the year 2000 during the President Jiang Zemin. And when they proclaimed this as a nature reserve, they removed thousands of Tibetan nomads out from those areas, claiming that removal of Tibetan nomads were necessary for the protection of the environment in that area. But what happened was 13 years after the proclamation of the nature reserve, the same government gave a license or gave permits to mine inside the same nature reserve. Not only they were mining inside a nature reserve, they were mining on a sacred mountain. And this violates 2 things. First, this violates the nature reserve rules and regulations. And this also violates the rights, cultural sentiments of the Tibetan people. Now, what is irony here is giving license to mine inside a nature reserve where Tibetan nomads were removed clearly confirms long-held fear among Tibetans that removal of Tibetan nomads were nothing but for making way for extensive mining across Tibet. When the Chinese government first removed Tibetan nomads, this stated that removal of Tibetan nomads was necessary for protection of grassland. But as our friend from Mongolia also had the same issue. But according to scientific research, they have confirmed that presence of nomads on the grassland is necessary for protection of the environment. So we Tibetan nomads have, for the last 7,000 years, have protected the fragile ecosystem on the Tibet Plateau. Now, Chinese government has removed almost 2 million Tibetan nomads out from their traditional way of life into concentrated villages. Unfortunately, they have not provided what they promised to provide: education, healthcare, jobs, and a dignified life. And it's basically a state-engineered mass deprivation of rights. Now, the case number 2 is violation of rights to accurate information. Now, this, on 29 March 2013, 83 mine workers were killed in a landslide inside a mining site. This happened on a mine site called Jama Mine, close to Tibet's capital city, Lhasa. Despite loss of 83 mine workers, 83 lives, 81 Chinese and 2 Tibetans, the Chinese quickly put on Xinhua News, stating that the cause of the landslide was nothing but natural factors. But we here in India did a thorough investigation of what really caused the landslide, and we found that the landslide was caused because of mismanagement of the mine. And our report clearly states that in order to acquire maximum profit in the shortest possible time, mining in Jama has been pursued aggressively. It was just a matter of time that such large-scale and aggressive expansion of mining was going to cause a large-scale disaster. Now, what this means is that the Chinese government has falsified information. They have used scientists to falsify information. They have used state media to falsify information, which means they have misled public. They have denied people the right to correct and accurate information on what really caused landslide in that mining site. And despite loss of 83 lives, the mining company was not punished. Instead, they continued to mine and continued to expand. Now, case number 3, violation to the rights of access to clean drinking water. Now, this, as I mentioned in my opening statement, clean drinking water is a way of life in Tibet. Someone who is born in Tibet, we are born with clean and pure water. And that's what we got used to it. But unfortunately, on 4th May 2016, more than 100 Tibetan local Tibetans came out on the street protesting against a mining company called Ronda Lithium Co. Limited in eastern Tibet, a place called Menya Lagang. What happened was the mining company released lithium waste into a nearby stream or a local river that people use for drinking. And that caused mass death of fish. And this is not only one-time incident. A similar incident happened back in 2013. And what the Chinese government did, as often they do, they halted. At least here, the issue was slightly better. They listened to the people, and they fooled people by halting mining for a few weeks. And once people were not protesting, they allowed mining to go on again without punishing them. Now, it's important to understand that for Tibetans, as I said, for us, the best offer we give to gods is water. In the Tibetan culture, we have something called water offering. If you visit any Tibetan home, you find water offering. It was sometime in the 12th century, an Indian Buddhist scholar who visited Tibet, he said, the purity of Tibetan river is so good that the best offer for God would be water of Tibet. And that's what we have been doing for last hundreds of years. But unfortunately, because water in Tibet begin to get polluted, we may not be able to drink, but even gods may not get those pure water that we used to offer. Now, the case number 4, violation of rights, cultural rights. This is important. On 31st May 2016, more than 2,000 local Tibetans came out protesting against another mining on one of their sacred mountains called Kunghe Lhari in northeast Tibet, in Amdo, to be precise. Now, what happened here was the mining has been going on since 2012. People have been protesting since 2012. And 3 self-immolations happened because of mining in that particular area. 2 Tibetans self-immolated right on the mining site. Names given here, Tsiri Tundu, age 34, self-immolated on 20 November 2012. Kunchu Tserin, age 18, self-immolated on 26 November 2012. And another Tibetan self-immolated a year later, Tsunti Jamtso, age 44, on 19th December 2013. In his will, what he stated, the agony caused by mining on their sacred mountain is too much to bear. Now, it's important to understand that there are scientific research done on the importance of Tibetan sacred mountains and the belief in the sacred mountains. That this is a field research done on one of the Tibetan sacred mountains, and it says, Tibetan people's belief in the sanctity of sacred sites has greatly contributed to the environmental protection of key ecological sensitive areas. This is very true. When I was growing up as a kid in Tibet, my parents and my grandparents, they tell us not to shout or play or dirt or break branches of trees at the sacred mountains. And sacred mountains are revered and protected at all costs. And this has protected the fragile ecosystem on the Tibet Plateau. Now, it's also important to understand that, going back to one of the cases here, For the case number 1, the Chinese government sent 500 Chinese paramilitary troops to suppress 4,500 local Tibetans protesting against them. And they fired tear gas and rubber bullets. And when that happened, a Tibetan, one of the protesters, Sokpo Chukdu, he stabbed himself in desperation. And this is what he said when a friend of him went to visit him in the hospital. I felt a sense of helplessness, as there was no one we could go for justice. This is why we bring these issues out here. Because people in Tibet have no one to go for justice. And people in the free world have the responsibility to echo those voices. Now, many of you might wonder that in recent years, Chinese government have been speaking a lot about environmental protection. To be very honest with you, I like to acknowledge that ever since President Xi Jinping came into power, he has done some contribution towards environment protection. He brought out a new environmental protection law in 2015, which was pretty good. He signed an agreement with the US to cap carbon emission by 2030, and he has been speaking a lot on environmental protection. But it's important to understand that what's written on the paper and what's been said is not true on the ground. There are a lot of contradictions on the ground. This Chinese government issued something called 22 circular listing 22 illegal activities in which environmental groups are listed as illegal, which clearly contradicts what they have been talking about environmental protection. If environmental NGOs are listed as illegal, then who will work for environmental protection? So ladies and gentlemen, it's important to understand that Tibet is a very, very beautiful place. It's not only beautiful, but it's also very important. So what happens in Tibet, as our Honorable Session said, what happens to Tibet may happen to other countries. What I can say is what happens on the Tibet Plateau will have massive repercussions beyond its geographic boundary. Tibet Plateau is the roof of the world, the third pole, the weather maker of Asia, and the water tower of Asia. Tibet Plateau with 2.5 million square kilometers of area, sitting at an average elevation of more than 4,000 meters above sea level. It is considered to be the world's largest and highest plateau ever existed in geologic history. Because of its high elevation and massive surface area, it is also home to the third largest store of ice on the planet, beyond North and South Pole. So its role is as important as North and South Pole. Because of huge presence of ice on the plateau, Tibet Plateau also influences global climatic pattern, and its influence extends as far as Europe and North America. And also because of high elevation and massive presence of glacier and permafrost, Tibet Plateau is also home to world's largest rivers. If you travel any part of Asia, you are never far from Tibetan rivers. Now to conclude, these are my recommendations. There are 5. To read it out, the Chinese government must respect and protect the rights of the Tibetan people's cultural beliefs in the sanctity of the sacred mountains, lakes, and rivers of the Tibet Plateau. The Chinese government must set firm, uncompromising, and transparent license procedure for mining permits in Tibet. For issuing such permits, local Tibetans should be consulted, and their voluntary consent should be sought. Voluntary, this is very important. The Chinese government should also strictly monitor and prohibit mining companies from dumping hazardous mine waste into the surrounding areas and rivers. The forceful relocation of Tibetan pastoral nomads on any pretext should be halted immediately. Those already resettled should be provided jobs, education, health services, and business opportunity to live a dignified life. Finally, people in the free world and UN members should raise such issues with China, work for environmental protection of the Tibet Plateau, and the protection of Tibetan people's social and environmental rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tempala, for throwing enough light on the significance of the Tibetan Plateau and why the protection of the rights of the Tibetan people, in particular the environmental rights, is significant. Two things Tempala flagged up two important things. That's the resettlement of nomads has already caught the attention of the UN, and when the then Special Rapporteur for Food, Oliver D. Schutter, visited China, he did express concerns in his report and said that and he coined the term forced eviction of the nomads. So that's for the Mongolian nomads and the Tibetan nomads as well. And he said that this is going to have severe consequences, and we are all here to see the consequences unfold. And also regarding the mining protest in Amchok on the Gonyonglari mountain, sacred mountain, and the 3 self-immolations that took place, the UN special procedures and mandate holders conveyed an urgent communication to China back in Feb 2017, and they pointed to the violent crackdown on the peaceful Tibetan protesters. So what is encouraging is that, yes, there is rights violations, but Tibetan people are at the forefront of resistance, and that's being heard loud and clear in the outside world. So Tempala, thank you very much for summarizing the essence of the environment, the significance of the environmental protest on the Tibetan Plateau. We will now talk about the case of Uyghurs, and with us we have Dolkun Isa, who is the Vice President at the World Uyghur Congress. Are you the president? Yes. Oh, sorry. The president of the World Uyghur Congress, and was a former student leader of the pro-democracy demonstrations in Xinjiang University, and needless to say is one of the most visible and feared dissident in today's world. So over to you, Dolkun. You'll talk about, obviously, the case of Uyghurs.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Prime Minister. Thank you for inviting me such an important event. I thank you, Tibet office in Geneva. Well, before I start, I would like to thank Duri Gretny, because he today show us very important fact from the international world map, is Turkestan. Is this map from 1920 years? It is mean, and 1920 East Turkestan exists in the world, but Chinese Communist Party was not exist at that time. So yeah, but problem is, professor and shows us packed East Turkestan, but at the presentation all the time talking about Xinjiang. I'm a little bit confusing on this. But however, it is the freedom of expression. We respect. Yeah. So so this form organized and very timely, and because the world celebrates 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also 20th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights Defender. I just came back from Paris this morning. I was attending the World Human Rights Defenders World Summit, and celebrate and a couple of hundred human rights defenders in Paris for the 20th anniversary of the Human Rights Defender Declaration. Well, today, during my speak today, I will give brief overview and the current situation in Turkestan. It is a critical time for all us, Uyghurs, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, and all who long their basic right and freedom in China. Events like this are so important to encourage dialogue and understanding between our communities. No more than ever, we need to have solidarity and collective rise the terrible human rights situation under CCP. Also, China has denied us our basic right and oppressed the Uyghur people for the many years. The situation now is worse it has ever been in my lifetime. In the past 5 years, particularly Since Xi Jinping has come to the power and appointed Chen Cheng-go as a party secretary in the Uyghur Autonomous region, treatment of the Uyghur has deteriorated beyond my imagination. Under Xi Jinping leadership and appointed party secretary Chen Cheng-go, most of them you know who is Chen Cheng-go. Chen Cheng-go was the party secretary in Tibet, and he used brutal way crackdown on the Tibet people, and he used his experiment in Tibet now and implemented in East Turkestan and the new restriction. And he really turned East Turkestan as a police state. 10,000 of new police and military personnel have been sent to the control in the East Turkestan, and dense network police station, roadblocks, checkpoint, ensuring absolute control of the Uyghur in East Turkestan and the Kazakh. We have also witnessed mass collection personnel data from CCTV, scanner, facial recognition software, public database, police checkpoint, and from DNA and blood samples, which analyzed using artificial intelligence in the large data hubs. What once was operation and violence has turned into the international strategy by the Chinese government to undermine and erode everything about Uyghur identity that make us unique. We are now enduring an attack on the very core of our being. In the past 5 years, particularly, we have witnessed strategy of the Chinese Communist Party shift to on apologistic cultural assimilation and the social re-engineering of the Uyghur people. Everything that makes the Uyghur people unique, or language, or religion, or culture has been targeted. Young generation of the Uyghurs are being targeted particularly for indoctrination. So-called bilingual education program have for many years been undermining Uyghur language in school and forcing Uyghur students to use Mandarin Chinese. Since September 2017, just last year, the use of the Uyghur language at all levels of the education has been banned, particularly Hotan Prefecture in East Turkestan. The final phase of the Chinese attempt to totally assimilate the Uyghur people has been its most sinister. The mass arbitrary detention of the Uyghur in political indoctrination camp, some say is concentration camp, some say is indoctrination camp, some is intermediate camp, is Gulag. However, it is a detention center, this is detention camps. The goal of this camp are clear: totally re-engineering and assimilate entire ethnicity to be complete to the Chinese states. Today, over 1 million Uyghur beings, maybe it is already more than 1 million Uyghur, because this estimate number is in the beginning of the January. Since already 10 months passed, we heard every day new people sent to the camps, but we have never heard people coming out from the camps. So some NGO already estimates this number up to 3 million, but we don't know the exact number. 1 million Uyghur people are suffering and are deprived of the basic rights. They are subjected brainwashing aimed and eroding their tie to their Uyghur identity and fact torture, enforced disappearance, death if they do not cooperate. They are innocent people whose only crime was being born Uyghurs. I cannot understate the fact this had on the Uyghur community, both in diaspora and East Turkestan. Starting in April 2017, Chinese government started cutting off all communication between Uyghur in East Turkestan and the diaspora. As they are beginning rounding up thousands of Uyghurs and sending them to the camps. Like almost all the Uyghur diaspora, I lost contact with my family around this time. For over years, I haven't been able to contact my 90-year-old fathers, my 78-year-old mother and brother and sisters. I have learned that my brothers are detained in the concentration camp, but until recently, I have received no information about my parents. Imagine the pain and frustrations knowing your family might be suffering, and you cannot do anything to help them or even hear their voice. My worst fear were realized little months ago. Then I received very sad news. My mother passed away 15th of May 2018, but it is a 21st century, communication century, but I couldn't get this news nearly 1 month. I got this news nearly 24 days later. I got June 12th, but I had no idea what was happening to my mother. She was died at the camp, at home, hospital. But later time, I learned it from the international media. 78 years old and a retired woman was put in camps 1 year ago, and she was passed away in the camps. It is just an example. I had not able to talk to her over the years. I have not able to see her in over 24 years since I was forced to flee my homeland. I cannot reach out and comfort my father and the brother. I still don't even know if they are still okay. My father, I have no idea. My father, he's alive or died, no idea. Today, it is, I can say, 99% Uyghur who live in exile, see Europe, United States, around the world, have lost contact family members. So I emphasize all the time when I had European leaders and the foreign ministry and the parliament member, I told, we are Uyghurs, really peaceful people, nation. We against any kind of violence. But Chinese government pressure to us to be in violence. Today, only in Europe, I believe more than 15,000 Uyghurs living in the European country. Can you imagine, in the more than 10,000, 15,000 people cannot hear the voice of family member. They cannot stop thinking to the family. No news from them. I can say all the Uyghurs who live in Europe today have a psychological problem, really. And one day, if the world still silence like today's, and because World Uyghur Congress, we trying to convince the people avoid from violence. But sometimes we are really under the attack, under the pressure from some or community. You talking all the time, not violence, peaceful way, but nobody listen to your voice. No result, you know. So if situations going on, maybe one day, one Uyghur attacked the Chinese consulate, maybe attack some Chinese diplomat, because psychological problem we all have. I personally maybe sometimes have a personal, because I lost my mother. I don't have enough idea. My father is still alive or died. Everything will be possible. So that's why, so all the time I talk, it is a European country, Western country, the world should have some responsibility, should be take this point, take attention. Today, Chinese government is even trying to control any belief on the not only today, on the afterlife as well. With the new restrictive law establishing state control over every aspect in peaceful religious practice, praying at home, holding private schools, attending mosque, teaching children the spirit of Islam, all considered illegal for the Uyghurs today. Even how you are dressing, what do you eat, it is also decided by the Chinese government. Just the beginning of October, Chinese government implemented new rule saying anti-halalism. We are Muslim. We are born Muslim. It is not my fault. Today, Chinese government say, and if you say, no, I don't eat pork, I don't drink alcohol, you are in the anti-terrorism law concentrate, and you are radicalized. Immediately punished. You know? Today, you cannot say halal is forbidden completely. And the last Ramadan, Last year and then before last year, Ramadan time, Chinese government is forbidden fasting. Even during the daily time, government provide water and the food, forced it to drink, eat school children and employer. If who refuse to drink and eat, because some people and hidingly, secretly fasting. Who refuse to drink and eat, somehow you are fasting, they immediately punish. You know? And since after Chingchango, as a party secretary, he implemented another rule. Confiscation of the Quran, all the religious book, and the burning of the Quran. Where was very surprising. 3 years ago, one of the pastors is in New York, confiscation Quran, he declared the burning of the Quran. Then the whole Muslim world stand up and made the protest. But today, Chinese Communist Party already burning Quran, but no single Muslim country is raising this issue. Silent, all the time support Chinese government. Well, even today, coming this level, forbidden Muslim name as well. Actually, it's not Muslim name. We are used Ahmed, Samet, Ahmed, Erkeş, Dolkun. This is the we use since more than 1,000 years. It is the culture, it is the identity, it is the tradition of the Uyghur. But today you cannot give such a name to your baby. Aisham, Ahmed, Samet. You cannot find any example around the world, such a separation. You cannot grow off your birth. Woman cannot heart scared. You know, even what do you eat, how you dress, determined and decided by the Chinese government. The security checkpoint to enter the mosque, video cameras monitor every action of those who enter. All imam must be approved by the CCP and who are appointed due to their loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese officials have described Islam and all the religions as an ideological illness that must be eradicated. Freedom expression, assembly also virtual no existent. Peaceful demonstration in the past very brutal crackdown. 2009, 5th of July, and the peaceful demonstration is cracked down by the Chinese army and the police. According to the Chinese statistic, 173 people were killed. But since it already 10 years passed, a lot of eyewitnesses escaped and came to Europe and to the United States, some of the world. They are saying it's more than 3,000-4,000 people. We don't know. Already 10 years passed, but we don't know really how many people were killed, how many people had injuries, how many people disappearance. Well, so this is the situation. So as I hope, we have made clear the current situation in East Turkestan, incredible concerning the human rights violence are occurring on a mass scale. Tibetan, Southern Mongolia, Chinese civilian, and this whole call for their basic right and the freedom are being brunt of the Chinese Xi Jinping policy. Well, it is a time to solidarity. It is a time we speak loudly. So, and also it is a time United Nations should take some action. So, November 6th, this is perfect time. Internationally, all the member states really concerning this case, Tibet issue, Uyghur issue, Mongol issue, and the Chinese civilian people's issue, and should be strongly and loudly raises this issue. Finally, I will make short notes. November 6th and the next week, during the review on China, UPR, and the Uyghurs, Tibetan, Mongol, Taiwanese, and the Vietnamese, and all the Uyghur, and the peoples who are under CCP, we are gathering and holding mass demonstration in front of the UN, in front of the broken chair. So we are invited you. We are happy if you join us, and it is also good chance we speak loudly and we show our solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dolkun Isa, for again telling us about the scope and size of the human rights abuse and the violations in East Turkestan. And you rightly said, it is a reminder of the times during the Cultural Revolution, during the martial law in Tibet, and Ten Gongxiang. I mean, what is happening in Xinjiang today, in East Turkestan today, was mastered or it's copy-pasted from the Tibet experiment. And you're right, Tibet served as the laboratory. And in worst case, Tibet is the place where they legalized violent crackdown and mass detention. And I would like to chip in, as a Tibetan and someone who's been with the movement. The Tibetan movement is 60 years, so we are ready to go for another 100 years. And one thing that has sustained us or made it a success story, I think, is a commitment, is our unfaltering commitment to nonviolence. And I do understand your emotions, do understand your sentiments, but one thing I would like to really reiterate is the constant advice by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the champion of nonviolence, who has said that nonviolence does not mean passivity. It's not weakness. It's not cowardice. It's courage. And nonviolence is the most pragmatic way forward and is bound to have a successful ending. So with that, we will now go on to the next speaker who will speak on the Mongolian issue, Temsiltu, who is a partisan leader of the Mongolian student movement and heads the Southern Mongolia Congress based in Germany. So Temsiltu will speak in Chinese, and Peng Shuang, who is one of the Asia coordinators for International Tibet Network, will provide simultaneous translation. So Peng Shuang will be here. Temsiltu, you can speak from the dais.
谢谢西藏流亡政府邀请我参加这次会议。
Is it on? No. Okay. Just say hello, everyone. I'm very thankful for the Central Tibetan Administration for inviting me to this forum.
我希望呢，这个西藏流亡政府能够早日结束流亡，回到西藏，使我有机会能够参加你们国泰民安的会议，做一个朋友。还有呢，我希望在布达拉宫朝拜尊者达赖喇嘛。
I would really hope that someday the exiled Tibetan can end the status of being exiled and return to Tibet. And I will have the chance to be invited to a conference in Tibet, and will be able to meet His Holiness Dalai Lama in Potala Palace rather than in exile.
这里面大多数是搞理论的、搞研究的。今天讨论人权，使我学到了很多东西。但是我觉得这种讨论会，我们还可以讨论很长时间，是不是能解决问题？这个我们会逐步的看到，可能能看到的效果。
And a lot of people here today are researchers and are very proficient in theories, and I've learned a lot about human rights today. But I'm also thinking that if this kind of discussion can go on, and I'm also thinking that if this will really work in process someday.
从1979年开始，我公开跟这个 中共吧斗了将近快40年了，给我的感觉呢，中共要不完蛋，我们蒙古人没有希望，只能被他同化、消灭掉。
And since 1979, I've been having my struggle with PRC for almost 40 years now. And my conclusion from my experience is that unless the PRC can really fall, unless the CCP can really gave up their power, there is no way that the Mongolians can gain our freedom.
西方原来从克林顿到奥巴马，他们认为呢，让中国加入世贸，让中国经济发展，出现中产阶级，最后中国民主化，世界和平安宁。
And from the Clinton to Obama administration and the United States, they follow a path that was mentioned earlier. And they let China engage. They let China get into WTO and other organizations. And they feel that China would gradually develop their middle class. They will have economic development. They will gain democracy someday, really soon.
事实呢，这个中共不仅没有改变，而且它通过经济发展以后呢，实力扩张以后要控制世界。
But the truth is, it's not like PRC doesn't change themselves at all, but they instead try to control the world and change the world.
所以中共是对我们蒙古人、维吾尔人、西藏人实行的野蛮的殖民统治，它就是要灭亡我们。
And so what China has done to us Mongolian, Tibetans, and Uyghur people are actually brutal colonization, and the only purpose that they are doing this is to assimilate us and make us part of Chinese.
我原来也希望中国能够放下屠刀，立地成佛。
I used to hope that China would give up their bloody knife and try to make peace with us.
但是呢，中国是一个不讲信义的民族，他逼着西藏人59年签了这个51年签了这个17条，完了跟英国人又签了这个香港回归的这个中英声明，说50年不变，20年就变卦了。
And we can see that Chinese government don't keep their promise at all. At 1951, they've signed the 17 points agreements with Tibetan government, and after that, they've signed the agreement on handing back Hong Kong with the British government, and they said that the political system would not change in 50 years, but as we can see, it's already changed just in 20 years.
所以有人说呀，跟这个流氓打交道，绅士总是吃亏。中国是一个野蛮的流氓国。
And we always said that you can't gain anything from by bargaining with a gangster, and China is a gangster nation.
我为什么这样讲？因为我们蒙古人呢是第一个内蒙自治区，47年成立的，中共当时保证我们要在自己土地上当家做主，过幸福生活。
And the reason I'm saying the things about it is because in South Mongolia we have the first autonomous region in PRC. It's established, the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region established in 1947. And by the time the Chinese government did promise Mongolian to make them have a good life.
最后呢，我们不仅没有过上幸福生活，我们呢在家里和平的老老实实待着，被他们来屠杀。
And in the end, the Mongolians, not only Mongolians didn't have a life of happiness by just staying home and being themselves Mongolians, they were genocide by the Chinese government.
1967年，毛泽东派69军、38军进入内蒙。 滕海清将军率领对蒙古人实行了种族灭绝性的大屠杀。
And in 1967, the Chinese government they sent a whole troop to southern Mongolia, and they execute a genocide inside southern Mongolia.
从我个人来说，1947年中共的军队进入东北，第4野战军就把我的姥爷给枪毙了。
And for me, in 1947, when the Chinese government or the troop that entered the northeast of China, and he already killed my grandfather.
1968年，在所谓的瓦砾人党这个屠杀蒙古人中，我的爷爷也是67、8岁被打死了。
And in 1968, another grandfather from another parent, he is also killed by Chinese government in a conflict.
尊者教导我们要慈悲，我也是想慈悲。我从1992年来到德国以后，4月30号开始跟中国海外民运开会，开了20多年了，26年。
And although His Holiness Dalai Lama always teach us to have compassion, and I've been always trying to practice compassion. But since I escaped from Mongolia in 1992 and arrived in Germany, I've been here and having meetings with the exiled Chinese dissidents for almost 20 years now.
开了26年会以后，我明白了，中国这个原来国民党、共产党控制蒙古人都是一样的，海外这个民主党啊，他也是啥呢？他很这个慈悲，他说咱们好好过，但是你蒙古不能独立，蒙古是我中国的。
And one of the conclusions I had from the 26 years of meetings is that like the Chinese mindset is still really similar, and they feel that although they were looking for democracy in China, but all those different nationalities inside China still need to be part of China.
他们搞人口侵略，向我内蒙抢我的草原，最后呢移民，在人口上把我们搞成少数。我们在自己的土地上成了绝对的少数。
So in southern Mongolia, it's not only genocide, that's just like I mentioned. They also occupy our land, our own grasslands, and also they have put a lot of Han Chinese immigration into South Mongolia and make Mongolian minorities on their own homeland.
他们用过他们的武装占领我们的草原，变成汉人的农家良田，使我们蒙古人子孙后代将来没有立足之地。
And through armed force, they have put a lot of lands that used to pasture land for Mongolian nomads into farms of Han Chinese farmers. And this eventually would make our offsprings of Mongolian have no land to stand on the homeland.
他们把我们的草原，刚开始通过开荒种地，后来通过开矿。最后呢，变成沙化、沙尘暴。
And so the grasslands they've turned the grassland into farms, and sometimes they turn it into they put it into minings. So eventually, all these like development and construction results in desertifications and make all the land into deserts.
我们草原的蓝天白云。他们呢破坏了以后，最后搞成雾霾，我们见不到自己的蓝天。
And after all the destructions and pollutions, you can no longer see blue sky in South Mongolia. There is only smog.
所以我们呢跟中国人一块儿走，我们只有完蛋的一条路，灭亡的一条路。他们要让我们当中华民族，让我们成吉思汗子孙当炎黄子孙，这是我们会奋斗到底，我们不会认这个命。
And so, as per I'm concerned about, I do feel that there's no way out for us to keep, for us Mongolian to keep cooperating with Han Chinese people, and there's really no way out for us if we keep this and to keep ourselves being part of China.
上个世纪30年代，在欧洲有绥靖主义。让希特勒做大，给世界的带来了灾难。
And in the last century, we can see that the appeasement atmosphere in Europe has caused Hitler and the Nazi Germany getting stronger and stronger.
现在我觉得在欧洲，在世界上，也是绥靖主义很厉害，让中国不断做大。
And right now, I still feel that kind of atmosphere around the world on China that make China have the space to grow and develop.
中国人的有些恶毒是我们的这个人类的理解力很难想象的。
And some of the really evil doings from Chinese people to others is really like beyond our imagination.
他们在这个他们愿意说东土，我们蒙古人的准噶尔地区，在白音哥罗自治州、蒙古自治州，试验核武器，毒害蒙古人和维吾尔人。
And it's not only in East Turkestan, but also in the east part of Mongolia. Chinese have nuclear experiments, and those experiments are polluting both Mongolian and Uyghur people.
他们在我们的阿拉萨沙漠里埋核废料，不仅埋自己的，1987年还把德国的核废料拿了埋在那儿，他们自己拆迁。我们蒙古人，我们就是要让我们断子绝孙。
And they also put nuclear waste in the Mongolian desert, and it's not not only put the nuclear waste from the Chinese nuclear plants, but they also took others' nuclear waste. In 1987, they also took others' nuclear waste and put it there also. And this is this is like a genocide to us Mongolian.
所以我认为啊，讨论呢很好，但是呢很难改变现状。我们可以继续讨论，20多年我也讨论了20多年，我没有看到任何大的改变。当然说这个。我认为呢，最终的问题还是要靠行动。我们要我们的敌人不仅是中共，是中国。中国不解体，我们蒙古人、维吾尔人、西藏人根本没有希望。你跟他谈，他也不遵守条约，他是个流氓国。
And I do feel that there can be a lot of fruitful conclusion out of discussions, but for all these 20-something years, I feel that there's something more important, which is actions. And if China, if the whole PRC is not going to dissolve someday, then there will be no freedom for us Mongolians, Tibetans, and Uyghur people.
我今年62岁了，我蒙古人现在衰弱了，但是我准备还是要奋斗到底。直到死也要跟中国干到底。
And I'm already 62 years old this year, but us Mongolians and myself will still struggle with China until the days of my death.
为什么呢？是因为生存是人的本能。中国要灭亡我们蒙古，那我要等死吗？我们一定要做一个成善的后代。我虽然很弱，但是我要跟他们，我们的民族要跟他们斗到底。
The reason I'm doing this, I'm saying all these, is because we can see that survival is a human instinct, and for us Mongolians, we have warriors as our ancestors, and this is our destiny to struggle with our own freedom.
我们蒙古人的希望就是在自己的草原上过自己的日子，和平、安宁。不去打搅别人，也不需要别人来打搅我们。我们在自己家里是主人，而不是看人脸色、听人家的话或者被人欺负。
And the only wish of Mongolian people is just live peacefully on their own grasslands, having their own way of life, and being not disturbed by other people. And this simple wish hasn't been fulfilled for years.
所以我支持川普。打贸易战，希望能把中共打趴下，这样我们是一次机会，我们才能获得自由和解放。
So I do support the actions of the United States to punish China economically, so that there will be a really good opportunity for us people to approach our goal to fight with China.
好，你们是这个学者。 我不是学者，我是奋斗了一辈子粗人，所以呢，如果有些话说的不合适，请大家谅解。
And I know a lot of you here here are academics and you are really educated people. I don't receive that much of educations, and if any of my word I just said has make you guys uncomfortable, I do apologize here.
谢谢大家。
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Temsil to Superchod. You're very right. I mean, apart from the racial discrimination that's rampant and pervasive across southern Mongolia, it is also noteworthy that Inner Mongolia actually serves as a model for China's policy of assimilation. So it helps to further their assimilationist agenda, which is now replicated in Tibet and in East Turkestan as well. So the case of southern Mongolia is also a glaring case of the level of rights violation that China can make against people in regions under their rule. And I think with the Inner Mongolia, obviously, they have not just been outnumbered, but then, as I said in the beginning of my introduction, cultural assimilation and annihilation. I think these are the two key words. And I think we still have East Turkestan and Tibet, and ensure that such kind of assimilation does not take place in Tibet and in East Turkestan. So Tim Seltu is one of the senior most speaker participant in this room, and to see that level of energy and commitment in his work, I think it's truly inspiring for everyone of us in this room. So thank you, and thank you, Peng Shuang, for the very, very effective translation. I think doing a simultaneous translation is going to be a tough thing, but she's been on it for years at International Tibet Network. So thank you, Peng Shuang. So we will now talk about Hong Kong, and with us is Edward Chin, who flew in yesterday from Hong Kong. He is the convener for Hong Kong 2047 Monitor, and is a commentator on financial and political affairs as well. So Edward's presentation will throw up some important pointers for discussion, because Hong Kong actually tells us about China's commitment or lack thereof to its own promises, agreements, and to its own commitments. So I will now give it over to Edward.
Well, thank you very much, first of all. It is a difficult topic because I live in Hong Kong, and rightly or wrongly, Hong Kong reverts back to China in 1997. And after 21 years of so-called under China's rule, things have changed so drastically, much different from what I originally imagined. Because when I relocate back to Asia in year 2000, I truly believe what Deng Xiaoping talked about, you could still have a horse racing and then dancing of sorts, but things have changed, especially in the last 6 years. I left in 1984 when the joint declaration was signed, and then Margaret Thatcher fell, I think near in Beijing, right? Like almost fell. It was a year when a lot of people think, hey, should we trust the CCP? And a lot of families, they move overseas, mostly Canada. And from last count, I think there are approximately over 600,000 Hong Kongers with Canadian passports. And in 1989, Tiananmen came. When Wu Kai-shi went to U of T, I was one of the volunteers who supported the cause because I was watching it on CNN. I just graduated from university. So as a former banker and also hedge fund expert, but also now I spend more time in humanitarian and also commentating on Hong Kong local issues. I see right now being a Hong Konger, it's quite difficult because I used the topic the dying of Hong Kong, and I had this presentation in Taipei just 3 weeks ago, but I'm going to make it short since we got 15 minutes, right? So the dying of Hong Kong, how it resembles the 17-point treaty with Tibet versus the Joint Declaration. This is something I guess I want to look into. Now, Hong Kong, is it the next Tibet? That's one question. Now, we have a population around 6 million. When I talked to the head of the Tibet government in exile in Taipei, he told me that in 1959, when there was a genocide over the next few years, there were around 1.2 million people that were killed. Now, there was no record of sorts, not enough pictures to show the world that, hey, a lot of people actually were persecuted, and then the genocide happened. So how could I, tell that story, and how can I link these things together? Now, something terrible happened in 1959. In 1989, Tiananmen happened. What happened next year is the 60th government in exile, they call the uprising. And what happened to Hong Kong? Hong Kong, a lot of Hong Kongers now, they think about probably not even half of the time of the so-called 50-year non-intervention policy. But things have changed so much that people have lost confidence. A little bit about our group, 2047 Hong Kong Monitor, who we are. We are a bunch of professionals working in Hong Kong, mainly in the financial industry. Hedge funds, regulators, who believe that Hong Kong needs a clean government. And we grew up in Hong Kong or have been calling Hong Kong home for many years. And a lot of us have relocated back because we believe that we could contribute back to the society and believe in the so-called one country, two systems as prescribed in the basic law. So myself, I run a hedge fund operation, but on the side, I spend more time now doing writing and talking about human rights stuff, and also commenting on the market. Now, Hong Kong is still a very good place, and don't get me wrong that Hong Kong is terrible now. It's not terrible, but things have just changed. And if you take a look at one of the UN research, in terms of a world life expectancy in 2016, now women and men combined together, you could live up to the age of 82.9. So Macau, even with the casinos and all that, right, you could go crazy going to casinos, 84.5 years of age. So Hong Kong is still very good, like, and a lot of you have been to Hong Kong. Now, I don't want to mention all these different cases that former legislators, they were not, they were barred from re-entering the race, and there's actually a contest going on, a by-election for one of the legislators, and not too long ago that the FCC, which I belong to the Press Freedom Committee. Now, the Vice President, Victor Mallet, was not able to renew his working visa. He was the bureau chief for FT Financial Times. So these things were kind of unprecedented. Just a few weeks ago, during the Double 10 celebration, when Tsai Ing-wen, president of Taiwan, was making a speech. Now, our chief executive of Hong Kong, which is more like a puppet, was saying, we should focus more on one country. but the two systems is not something that she really liked to uphold and defend. That makes me feel a little bit angry at times, because as a financier and as also a commentator, a lot of us have come back to Hong Kong because we believe in what Deng Xiaoping talked about. Now, a lot of things have changed. Hong Kong government would put a lot of resources trying to build an artificial island that would use up 2 generations of resources, talking about 1 trillion Hong Kong dollars. That's like half the size of Kowloon Peninsula, very big. And that could accommodate more than 1.1 million people. Currently, I think the census is that Hong Kong has around 7.1 million people. But when I take a look at this, trying to have more people to be accommodated in Hong Kong, and also the high-speed railway that just came in service just not too long ago. I look into the Tibetan history, and thanks to the umbrella movement, I didn't know the story of Tibet until just 1 year after the umbrella movement, when I met with the Holiness the Dalai Lama in Sydney, when we were doing a presentation at Sydney U. I didn't know too much about Tibet, so I was having a steep learning curve in the last 3.5 years. So I know about the railway in 1955 that was built. And then I am kind of having a little bit of a paranoia, saying that, hey, what if Hong Kongers want to fight for their independence? And then Beijing would send the army from the outskirts, not even in Beijing, some area, get them excited, and then just ship the army to come over and to suppress the Hong Kong people. Now, would that happen? Wukasha would know better back what happened in 1989, those troops that came. They are not from Beijing. But Hong Kongers, we are not trained to fight, to be honest. We are trained to be bankers, hedge fund managers, traditional fund managers, and work as the slaves for developers, the tycoons, right? Because we don't really have too much of an option other than being just a financial center, to be honest. So lo and behold, this U.S.-China trade war, we have little hope, and we have a little bit of hope now that maybe Donald Trump would do something, trying to get fair play. Now, question mark, and then of course people would think that, hey, Trump is just a business person. And then we kind of examine what happened in the talk just in June in Singapore between Kim Jong-un and Trump. Is it that he wants to build some Trump towers in North Korea? And then would he or anyone from the so-called Western world be interested in Hong Kong's affairs? Because Hong Kong, unlike Tibet, Hong Kong is part of China, I must say that. But we strongly believe that Tibet is not part of China. There's a big difference. Now, I follow the Hong Kong market and also follow the stock market because that's how we spend our time trying to extract as much return, because living in Hong Kong is very expensive. So people play the market, and then the market was down a lot. Shanghai market composite was down, I don't know how much since January. But then it was not a good time right now. But if you know how to hedge your investment, that's a different story. Now, what makes me upset was that after the umbrella movement in 2016, I was running for a board seat at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. There were like 12 seats, and one fund manager was retiring. But I was told by the Hong Kong EX, and they sent a circular to all the shareholders saying that they should support candidate A versus me, candidate B. And the only reason I can think of is because I represent the finance and banking group that support Occupy Central. But our stance is not that we want to topple the CCP. Is that we want a clean government. We want high impact governance. We want good transparency. and that's what should be expected for a publicly listed company. So it's a different fight, of course. There came Tiananmen, and then as I mentioned earlier, I was campaigning for people who left, and then Wu Kai-shi speak at U of T, I think, at the end of 1989, at that time. We had our own fight. It's Martin Lee in the middle, and then Anson Chen, me on the left, and then Professor Benny Tai was 4 years my senior at the same high school. And then I read his column, and then also an article written in the Next magazine, which is part of Apple Daily. And then I found out this professor was saying, civil disobedience is the last resort, and it has to be nonviolent. And then I was thinking, hey, why should we fight for something so hard? And then my attitude changed, and I think we as bankers and then people even working in government should really strive very hard to have a one person, one vote without pre-screening. So that was 4 years ago. That was a younger version of Joshua Wong, still a teenager at that time. And then there came the Occupy, September 28th, and it lasted for 79 days. Now, Occupy finished in December 2014, and no more Occupy. We changed the name of our group, finance and banking group that support Occupy Central, to 2047 Hong Kong Monitor. We invite people from different councils and also people from the academia to form this bigger group. And then we wrote actually a letter to Xi Jinping and published in FT, New York Times, I think, and some other publications, which is the 10th request to the Chinese Communist Party, saying that Xi Jinping should uphold the one country, two systems as prescribed in the Basic Law, and honor what Deng Xiaoping talked about, because we saw things have twisted quite a bit. Now, this is like the banker's wish, so-called 香港人对中国共产党的十个诉求. Now, my Mandarin is bad. I speak Cantonese. I try my best. I know most people speak Mandarin here. So, lo and behold, let's move very quickly. Winnie the Pooh, of course, is blacklisted in China. And we got 29 years left before 2047. That's why we changed the name to 2047 Hong Kong Monitor, back after the umbrella movement finishes. So how do we let more people know about the situation in Tibet? And then after meeting up with the Holiness the Dalai Lama, we have some people from Taiwan who live in Hong Kong, and then we were saying, hey, maybe it's good to mention the Joint Declaration of 1989, how it was compared with 1951, with the 17-point agreement, the similarities meaning other than diplomacy and military, the CCP would not interfere with what we do, right? But then the spokesperson from CCP would say, hey, the Sino-British Joint Declaration of Hong Kong has no longer any realistic meaning. They always say things like that. So we study more and more, and it's difficult to talk about Tibet in Hong Kong. And then whenever we have meeting, there were a few meetings that was dedicated to Tibet. The Dai Gong Bao, right? I don't know how to say it in Mandarin. Da Gong Bao. I don't know whether they are here. Yeah, they will write something very nasty, and then they will say, hey, things that you can think of. Just twisted the story. And there was also a movie on self-immolation, since some of you talk about self-immolation. It's called 10 Years. And it was shown at the FCC. There was 1 out of the 5 different episodes talk about what we have our own self-immolation in Hong Kong coming soon. I hope not. A lot of people, they prefer to leave than fight. But how to fight? Relying on Trump, or do we have to speak up? And I have a few possibilities, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. Now, it's important to talk about, for some of us in Hong Kong, not a lot of people think about the Tibet situation. They know there's a mineral water called 5100 Tibet Mineral, right? It's a listed company, and then they make a lot of money out of the Tibetan people, which I hate to admit. But then linking the story and also understanding how they work. Actually, you talk about them as bandits. We don't say that. We say triads. But then, you know, like, are they really that bad? And as a Christian, I say, hey, if Trump can talk to, you know, like Kim Jong-un, maybe he would get converted to Christianity one day, right? All these 7 guys here, you know, we pray, right? But then, again, we are looking for miracles. And also we are looking for pictures as well, what happened in 1959, and maybe Dr. Sangye can help me later on as a journalist and also commentator. I need more pictures about what happened, because the 60th uprising, and then it's difficult to talk about this in Hong Kong. And then, lo and behold, we had this movie called 10 Years, and it was really good to, you know, find the linchpin, so to speak. Yes, some of us know about the Midway approach, but then people care about, you know, like how much of their bank account was hurt because of this so-called U.S.-China trade war. And then there's also the Hong Kong Policy Act, which is a 1992 act enacted by the U.S. Congress, saying Hong Kong is separate from China for matters concerning trade. Now, a lot of you mentioned about Mike Pence's speech at the Hudson Institute, and well, can Xi Jinping rule China for life? You know, a big question mark. And then, you know, looking at, you know, the Patala Palace, Hong Kong, and then the death of Hong Kong, and then the holiness. I know we as human beings, you know, we all have one world, same humanity. You know, like how can we let the whole world know about the Tibetan situation, the Hong Kong situation, and then China, whether they keep their promise. It's an uphill battle, but I won't give up yet. We are not trained as fighters from a military sense, but I think we all have hope. So keeping hope alive is important as Hong Kongers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edward. You know, I mean, you're right when you say with Hong Kong, I think China actually mastered the art of making promises, retreating from their commitments, and getting off scot-free. And I think this is one of the biggest undoing of today's world as well. And again, the case of Hong Kong and the encroachment on the freedom of the Uyghurs actually tells us, I think, or raises some stark questions about China when it is increasingly trying to make its presence felt on the world stage. So Hong Kong is such an important and a crucial case that kind of mirrors the reality of the Chinese leadership. Thank you very much, Edward, again. We will now have our final speaker, Haden Tedong, who is an activist leader, a human rights advocate, and the director of Tibet Action Institute based in the US. So Laden will talk about how and why Tibet holds the key to making China accountable. So I'll have it over to Laden.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here amongst many old friends and such esteemed guests and fighters. I can feel the strength from this stage has actually given me energy when I'm feeling a little bit jet-lagged. So today I wanted to talk just briefly about Tibet as China's laboratory for repression. and Tibet as our laboratory for resistance. For far too long, Tibet has been a laboratory for repression, a place where the Chinese authorities have tested and sought to perfect systems of mass surveillance and control, and to create the ultimate police state. They don't let Tibetans out. They don't give them passports. They pursue and arrest, torture, and even shoot Tibetans who try to escape. They punish the families and the communities these people leave behind. And they don't let most foreigners in. They require special permits, tour groups, background checks for visitors. They ban the media and diplomats, and they refuse to give the vast majority of exiled Tibetans permission to return. They have Disneyfied Tibetan Buddhism while emptying out the monasteries and the grasslands, and trying to remove Tibetan language from the tongues of the most vulnerable and impressionable, the children and the young students. And just when we thought the repression couldn't get worse, it did. When Chen Chuangguo was made party secretary of the Tibetan Autonomous Region in 2011, he took the repression to a whole new level. His Orwellian grid system of social management, his 700 convenience police stations built at 500-meter intervals from each other, 12,000 new recruits called in for police-related activity, and households that were made to spy on each other in the double-linked household management system. In 2012, Chen oversaw the mass detention of Tibetans, mostly retired and elderly people, returning from His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Kalachakra teachings in India. In an unprecedented move at that time, these people were held for months at hotels, schools, military training centers, and bases. They were interrogated, ordered to denounce the Dalai Lama, and forced to attend patriotic re-education sessions. Many became ill from the stress of the experience. Some never recovered. Others died when they were released. And then in 2016, Chen Chuangguo moved to East Turkestan. And the system of surveillance and repression it took him 5 years to roll out in Tibet, now tried and tested, took only 2 there. He's implemented the grid system of surveillance, the convenience police stations. I understand 50,000 new hires for police-related jobs as of last year. And now this massive system of detention camps that is absolutely breathtaking in its scope and its potential for escalation. Faced with the reality of this crisis of repression, I believe all of us are asking ourselves the same question right now. What can we do? What can our governments do? How do we get the Chinese government to stop or to pull back in any way and change these policies? The situation is so bleak, and often it seems like what we're doing may not be working at all. But as bad as things are right now in all the regions that we're discussing here, I believe we can look inside Tibet and see that the answers to the very difficult questions lie in resistance. Over the past 6 decades, we have witnessed wave after wave of Tibetans resisting China's rule in myriad ways, despite the violence and the excruciating suffering they surely know they will face as a result of their actions. In March 2008, across all 3 historical provinces of Tibet, Utsang, Amdo, Kham, which on the map today that China has redrawn means both the Tibetan Autonomous Region and the vast areas outside of the TAR, which have been incorporated into Qinghai, Gansu, and Sichuan. We saw a new generation of Tibetans raised entirely within the Chinese system, with no memory of an independent Tibet, risk everything to come into the streets, to demand their freedom, to demand an end to Chinese rule, and to call for the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This occurred in spite of the years-long campaign and massive amount of resources Beijing spent on propaganda and security measures to ensure there would be no visible dissent in the lead up to and during the Olympic Games. And I think this is the beautiful truth that is the paradox of repression. The more the authorities try to suppress and control the people through intimidation, coercion, and violence, the more the people will resist, and the stronger their desire for freedom will grow. We have seen this to be true time and time again in Tibet and in the other places that now China controls, rules, Hong Kong more recently. Even today, in spite of the wave of violence and repression brought to Tibet since the 2008 uprising, Tibetans continue to resist and to challenge Chinese rule. Whether promoting traditional livelihoods, defending language and land rights, working to stop destructive resource extraction projects, Tibetans are advancing the struggle for rights and freedom through creative and organized nonviolent action. And so as much as Tibet has been a laboratory for repression all these years, it's also been the laboratory for resistance, one where Tibetans are constantly testing out new strategies and tactics of defiance and resistance, and they are doing it against all odds in a place where there is virtually no political space to move or even breathe. And this is where I want to draw attention to the Freedom House reports again. You know, you really have to look at the list by aggregate score and see Tibet there year after year as a place. Syria -1, Tibet 1, and then North Korea, Western Sahara, South Sudan. Year after year, you know, Tibet there with a -1 next to. I think many people don't realize how bad the situation is, how little space there is for anything. But yet the people continue. So in seeking answers to hold China accountable, I think the international community must take its lead from Tibetans. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has successfully muted criticism of its human rights record and derailed momentum and support for Tibet from world leaders and national governments through a lethal combination of sharp and soft power. They've taken open debate and discussion of China's rights transgressions out of the spotlight and into back rooms where our governments are led in circles of fruitless talks by their Chinese counterparts. One by one, they've picked off some of the most powerful nations and leaders on earth through brash bully tactics meant to punish and isolate any who meet His Holiness or who show open support for Tibet. And as these strategies have worked, Chinese leaders have been emboldened. They have become more brazen. We are seeing them steadily escalating repression in Tibet, in China, and in the nations and territories they control. And now they're seeking to normalize and export this authoritarian model to the rest of the world. Clearly, something has to change. If there is no cost to Beijing for all of this abuse, if there is no price to pay, be that social, political, or economic, things are going to continue in this downward spiral. It's time for our governments, and indeed all of us, to show some courage and do what Tibetans in Tibet have done all these years. Stand up to the Chinese government using new strategies and tactics, and also to re-engage in the tried and true strategies and methods that worked well in the past. Most simply and easily, I think like-minded world governments need to get together and formally engage in joint initiatives to defend Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, and Hong Kongers. They should return to publicly meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama. They should also meet with the President of the Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangye, as the legitimate representative of the Tibetan people. If these governments take action together as a group to defend human rights, democracy, and free speech, and they stand up to Beijing as one, it will be far more difficult for China to retaliate in the ways that we have seen them do so in the past. Perhaps in this time of economic uncertainty and trade wars, whatever you think about that, now is the time and the moment to test such a strategy. In the past year, we have also seen China's multifaceted efforts to influence global politics and opinion spotlighted like never before. The spike in awareness of Beijing's attempts to bend all of our thinking to their authoritarian worldview has created favorable conditions for us to campaign and to challenge and block China's efforts to infiltrate our free and open societies with insidious soft power programs like Confucius Institutes. We've been campaigning against Confucius Institutes in classrooms in the Boston area. We see it as important as a region, as a global destination for world-class education. And we've had a positive response so far, unlike in the past on this issue. Within just 5 months of launching our campaign, we've seen multiple high-profile media stories, including a Boston Globe cover page story, We've seen statements and letters of opposition in our area from 2 high-profile congressmen. And now 2 of the universities, UMass Boston and Tufts University, are in the process of reviewing or seriously rethinking their Confucius Institute partnerships. And I'm happy to announce here for the first time, Cambridge Ringen Latin High School, probably one of the top public high schools, not just in Massachusetts, but in the entire United States, last month officially ended their relationship with the Confucius Institute and closed their Confucius classroom after advocacy efforts led by local Tibetan students from that school and Tibetan alumni. At the same time, there is great strategic opportunity to target China's attempts to normalize and export its draconian censorship and surveillance policies. We need to unite and challenge Google and other tech giants like Apple and Facebook, who are playing into Beijing's plan to undermine global human rights norms by arguing that their moves to engage in censorship in China are nothing more than a business necessity in order for them to respect local laws. There must be a cost to them and to China for taking us all down this dark road. And there is a rising interest in a campaign like this amongst diverse groups of NGOs, activists, technologists, and others, and many people here today, representing such a diverse array of groups and interests. We all can play a role in making such a campaign, which is incredibly relevant and timely, very potent and effective. Finally, in closing, I just want to bring us back to Tibet as a laboratory for resistance that we can all learn from. I think if 6 million Tibetans, armed only with their Buddhist faith and desire for freedom, can time and time again stand up to one of the most populous, powerful, and violent nations on earth, then can we not do more? As we sit here on the eve of China's UPR, it seems clear that it is time for governments to put their resolve to the test and to speak out and put their concerns over China's horrific human rights violations on the record and in the most powerful way possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harun, for really highlighting the Tibetan resistance on the ground that's been going on for 60 years. Yes, I mean, Tibetans are preserving their identity and Tibetanness and have continued to put China's rule to test. And I loved what you said, Tibet as a laboratory for repression for China, but resistance for us. And I think that has to be the slogan in the years to come. And yes, Tibet also is a cautionary case for the rest of the world and an opportunity to holding China accountable. So with this, I want to thank all the speakers, but we have close to 7-8 minutes for a Q&A session. So if any of you have questions, please raise your hand and tell us who the question is addressed to. So I'll throw it open to the floor now for Q&A.
Yes, hello. Kai Müller from the Campaign for Tibet. I've got a question regarding the comparison Tibet, East Turkestan. And I was wondering whether the Chinese government has adopted a completely new approach towards what they call nationalities, in terms of no longer just going after those who have been identified as troublemakers after events and so forth. There's been a protest, so they identify those people, harsh punishment, some limited re-education, as they call it, to an approach that is completely different from that, in a way that they now go out, really actively go out to the people, as we've seen in Tibet since 2011, with all the work teams being sent out into the countryside and to literally all the area of Tibet, and now also in East Turkestan, with disregarding the backgrounds of those people, just taking them in. I was wondering, this must be something new, and I think it's something new in the sense that it shows something about trust. It shows something about the perspective and perception of the Chinese government vis-a-vis the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and everybody else. Meaning we cannot trust those people, and we have to go after them actively. Would you agree, for example, Ladon?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, you know, we saw the resistance of Tibetans, of the Mongolian herders, of, you know, the Uyghur people in this last decade. And I think with Xi Jinping and this, you know, rise to power with zero tolerance, there was always zero tolerance, but sort of over the top now, it's everybody. It's not just the usual suspects. And I don't know where that is reflected exactly in the, perhaps one of the more recent work forums on Tibet, but I think we're seeing it in practice, that it's not just the political prisoners and the ex-political prisoners and maybe Tibetans who've returned from exile. It's the young, it's the old, everyone is a potential co-conspirator and future dissident.
Well, and as we said in the, and the Xinjiang was the party secretary in Tibet. He used the brutal way, and he used his experiment in Tibet, and plus new restriction new restriction rule implemented in Turkestan. One similar thing is Xinjiang did same things in Tibet in the police monitoring station 2014-15, and he appointed party secretary in Turkestan. Then first thing is he did same things in Turkestan. Only Ürümqi example. 960 police monitor station established only one city. It means every 200-300 meters, one police monitor station. And so it is all the same, but no, it is, and in Tibet also I heard, I talked to a Tibetan friend, the Xinjiang also not and closing so-called eradication camp, but they also sent Tibetan and to the eradication system. But no, it is not eradication. It is completely different. This is detention completely. And some Western journalists visit Turkestan, Kashgar, Khotan. They say, oh, we visit Turkestan a couple of years ago as a tourist, as a journalist, but this time situation completely different. Nearly no one on the street. Nearly no one. All the business center and Kashgar, for example, Kashgar is an Asian city and a very crowded city, very energetic city. But one of the German journalists just in July, he visited 2 weeks and coming back say, oh, I was big surprising, nearly no one on the street and all the shopping, all the business center, all the closing, very few of them open, and even this, a few in front of this have X-ray, people is and through the X-ray. So, and and so eradication saying that, you know, it is today, more than 350 Uyghur professors, only one university, Xinjiang University, and the sent to the eradication camp. One of them, my professor, he's Abdulkarim Rahman, 90 years old. And how you can eradicate these people? It's a professor. Yeah. What do you eradicate them? And the 90 years old people. I say my mother was, but she was a 78 years old lady. How you can eradicate him? What purpose? So it is the situation thing.
Do you have any more questions from the floor? Okay.
Hi, my question's for Ed. As you remember yesterday, I was telling you I met Edward Leung, and I think his picture was in one of your slides, who Edward Leung was, or is, one of the leading young Hong Kongese activists, and later he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. For me, having met him and then seeing that in the papers, it was kind of moving and shocking. So my question is, how do you act as an activist without fear of repercussions from the Chinese government when you know someone from your circle who faced such consequences?
Well, the next upcoming trial, it's the founder of Occupy Centre, which is in, I think, November 16th, Professor Benny Tai and 8 others, so altogether 9 of them. You know, like if push comes to shove, so to speak, that they put the academics, the fund managers all in prison, then I guess there will be no investments in Hong Kong. And would the CCP be that stupid? That's one thing, because if we take a look at the you know, ICIJ report, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, they have over $4 trillion US worth of assets hiding overseas through BVI accounts and all that. Now, I think it would be good for the international community to expose these so-called money laundering things that's going on, because in the name of anti-corruption, they have made Hong Kong not the same Hong Kong anymore, because our rule of law is under duress, and also a lot of people have lost confidence. And talking about Edward Leung, even Joshua Wong, I feel very sympathetic for them, because they don't see their upward mobility as young people who are fighting for democracy. Now, when Benny Tai talked to me back 5 years ago, we as middle-aged people, we could give back more to Hong Kong, because we are not like the tycoons. We are like just middle-class working people, and then just the 0.2% of the tycoons control Hong Kong now is replaced with the princelings from China. So we are fighting for what we call the core values of Hong Kong. And then we want to see that resemblance, talk a lot about Tibet too, because Hong Kong, we hope, is not the next Tibet, but also it is kind of becoming the next Tibet with the fast speed railway coming, and also this artificial island. And then Carrie Lam is not doing anything. And I feel bad for the young activists. But as a middle-aged activist like myself, what would happen? You know, I could see if we having like a strong disagreement with China. Now, the worst they can do is that they would revoke our license, right, as fund managers, as brokers and whatnot. But then we, as very fluid Hong Kong people, definitely we could move to Singapore, democratic Taiwan, definitely. But then I think we have to act in all, you know, like in one people, right, to fight against this regime, which is a little bit going crazy. And we don't see, you know, like Xi Jinping can live forever, even though he wants to be emperor. But then, you know, like even the Qing dynasty only lasted, what, 250 years, right? So, but I think all I can say is keep hope alive and hope for a miracle.
All right, thank you, Edward. Thank you, everyone, all the speakers, all the guest attendees, participants. The dramatic deterioration of the situation in regions under the Chinese regime and the assault on the fundamental rights of the people, including the human rights defenders, is exacerbated by China's lack of commitments to its own promises, agreements. One thing is certain, China signs these agreements and treaties. I think it's signatory to over 100 human rights treaties. And the reason why they do it is to silence criticism, and definitely not with an intention to honor them. So therefore, as everyone on the panel said, action. We need to take action. We just cannot take the back seat and take things lying down. And I think it's a momentous opportunity and quite a historic moment that we are all together on the eve of UPR, right in the heart of Geneva. We need to make a collective effort and put an end end to China's long game on human rights. And to do that, we need to keep the hope alive, and we hope this forum will serve as a rallying point, not just for the UPR, but to strengthen advocacy at the United Nations and at international forums. Finally, as Edward said, it's all about being hopeful. I don't think there can be any magic in it, but I really, really believe that when the struggle is real, so is hope. So I'll conclude on that note. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. We now break for lunch for an hour. Right after lunch, we have eyewitness account at 3. So I request everyone to reconvene 5 minutes early. Yeah. Yeah. And lunch will be served right outside this room.